What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. It was a clear black night with clear a white moon. Minato and Kushina were in a tavern in a village a bit of a ways off from the village hidden in the leaves. The dynamic duo were having a night on the town. They usually did this in a different village, as to not draw attention to the fact that they are together, and to simply have a good time without someone trying to blow smoke up Minato's ass. The tavern was busy, not overly so to the point of moving around being difficult or annoying, but busy to the point where there were very few spare seats. Minato and Kushina were sat at a small table in the corner of the tavern, merely enjoying each other's company, for now. Sipping sake and making small talk, the couple were interrupted by someone sliding into the seat next to Kushina. Now Kushina would be the first to admit that she was no expert of social etiquette, however she was pretty sure that taking a seat without asking is somewhat rude. However, when she saw who it was that had taken a seat next to her, her eyes widened and her eyebrows rose. Tsunade. Minato's attention was drawn to his wife at the sudden exclamation. Having briefly zoned out up to this point, he looked at who had taken a seat at their table. Lo and behold, there she was, that last of the Senju, old Torpedo S herself. Kushi-chan, how've you been? Tsunade responded. Her voice was loud and her tone was exaggerated. She was clearly 3 sheets under already. Not too surprising, Minato mused. Me, how've you been? I haven't seen you in years, where have you been? What have you been up to? Tsunade's hazel eyes lost some their enthusiasm at the questions, however she responded nonetheless. Drinking, gambling and running from debt collectors. She all but cheered in response. Who woulda thunk? Minato muttered as he was about to take a sip from his sake saucer. Say something, sideburns? Tsunade resounded with a scowl and a tick mark of her forehead. In response, the vaunted yellow flash coughed into his saucer and proceeded to exclaim his innocence. The trio spoke well into the night. Kushina told Tsunade about her and Minato, as it was a secret known only to a select few, and Tsunade could be considered family. They spoke of recent and past ordeals and told stories. At some point, a young girl with shoulder-length black hair dressed in a dark gray kimono came over to the table and told Tsunade that she was returning to their hotel so that she could go to bed. Minato and Kushina learnt that this young woman was Shizune Kato, Tsunade's apprentice and also Dan Kato's niece. The couple dare not open that can of worms and left it at that. By around midnight, the tavern had emptied mostly and only a few people remained. During this time, a drinking game had kicked off at the table. They were having a game of Never Have I Ever, where if you've done what the speaker has never done, then you drink. They'd been playing for a while now, and things had been said, where if they were said sober, then the person who spoke would never be looked at the same way ever again. Put simply, they were beyond hammered. Hey, the life of a shinobi is dangerous and usually short. If you're not very good, that is. So people do as much stuff as possible to have a full life. Around 2 in the morning, Tsunade asked a zinger. Never have I ever Hick had a threesome. Nobody drank. Oh dear. What? You two hick have never gotten fruity in the sack? The question was slurred and loudly asked. They received looks. Not for the first time that night. Do shadow clones count? Minato inquired. He then laughed himself silly while Kushina adopted a sultry look on her face. I could really go for some shadow clones right now, Kushina said almost wistfully in a husky tone. Minato and Kushina briefly stared at each other. They began to giggle. Perversely. Hick room for one more? Tsunade asked. Now, perhaps there was some higher power up there at this very moment that decided to make some alterations to the fate of the world with all the grace of a freight train. As little did anyone know that this round of UAL intercourse would have unimaginable repercussions, on such a huge scale that an abnormally large toad sat in a bath of oil who knows where managed to fart himself awake from the whacked-out dream he was having about a redhead with anger issues, and a blonde with bipolar disorder. The next morning, across the elemental nations, the bros of the world awoke due to a disturbance in the force. The boys could sense it. Some simp out there had found the grail and had stepped into the promised lands. At exactly 8 o'clock that morning, all of the bros from the Raikage in the village hidden in the clouds to Zabuza Momochi in the village hidden in the mist simultaneously nodded their heads in ultimate respect. For somewhere out there, the boys had reached godhood. Minato Namikaze felt it, his ascension. As he regained consciousness, he felt two weight on his chest. Cracking open an eye, Minato saw a head of light red hair and a head of blonde hair. Minato turned his eyes to the ceiling and acknowledged his fellow bros through the force. Then he came back down to reality. Both Kushina and Tsunade groaned and began to stir. Minato panicked. He could feel the heavenly fun bags of both his wife and Tsunade pressed up against him. There's no instructions of what to do in this situation in the ancient Bro Codex. Minato screamed mentally. Kushina awoke to the heartbeat of her beloved husband. Her core felt sore, wet and warm. Her legs were shaky and her abs were achy. An intense night. Definitely shadow clones. Kushina adorned a content smile. She lifted her head and went to turn to look up at her husband when she came face to face, eye to eye with none other than Tsunade Senju. Tsunade awoke to pulse of somebody. She felt sore. This hasn't happened in a while. Well, who's the poor bastard who's about lose their manhood? She went to look up at the soon-to-be eunuch, only to come face to face, eye to eye with none other than Kushina Uzumaki. Fuck, oh fuck indeed. Violet eyes stared into hazel eyes and hazel eyes stared into violet eyes. They were both still as the grave whilst looking at each other. Seeing the stare down, Minato adhered to his primal instincts. He played dead. That morning was deemed so secret, that an entirely new class of secret had to be made to ensure that this whole fiasco was to never be spoken of again. And so the first ever Z-class secret was born, not to be spoken right up to when a person's catching Z's in a coffin. This was a genuine law passed by the almighty Yondaime Hokage simply to stop the world's foremost medic from castrating him. A whole month after the unspeakable event, Minato rose from his bed. He looked out of his bedroom window at the crimson sky. Red sky at morning, shepherd's warning. An ill omen. Blood will be spilt today. Minato could only hope that it wouldn't be his. Minato had left home for the office before his wife had awoken. After the event, Kushina became a dominatrix as punishment. Her adamantine chakra chains had never experienced such extraordinary use before. She put the fear of God into Minato with those chains. The day went by like most. Slowly. On the plus side, Jiraiya was around and in the office spending time with Minato, as was the Sandaime Hokage. Hiruzen Sarutobi. As a result, there was no need for any Anbu to guard the Hokage, as his present company was more than capable. That was false. They felt it before anything else. A low, far-off rumbling that could be felt through minor tremors in the floor. But it got closer, and closer, until it felt like an earthquake that measured 10 on the Richter scale was bearing down on top of them. Jiraiya began to panic. He knew these rumbles. He could feel the rage. Tsunade. Jiraiya hadn't felt such fury in her footsteps since that time she beat him half to death for performing observational research on her. Jiraiya shuddered at the memory. Hiruzen was having similar thoughts. He just hoped that Typhoon Tsunade would pass quickly, and that whoever her target was had their affairs in order. Minato was scared. He had no clue what was going on, but the fearful looks on his sensei's and predecessors' faces told him that he should be scared too. Just as Minato was about to flying Raijin to the roof of the tower to see what was going on, his poor door was launched at him at around 300 miles per hour. Only experience and reflexes allowed him to duck under the table to dodge the door which launched out of his office window. Shattering it first, like a scared mole, Minato peeked over his desk to see death. Tsunade stood in the threshold in a wide stance, head tilted down with eyes shut and fists balled. She suddenly looked up and opened her eyes and saw the object of her rage pitifully peer over his desk at her. She barely noticed the old pervert and her sensei standing in the room. Minato ducked back under the table. Tsunade marched through the office over to the desk. She punched through it and pulled Minato through it from underneath, splitting the desk in two. Tsunade held Minato up by the strap of his Jonin vest. Minato played dead. It had no effect on the wild Tsunade. Bringing him closer to her face, Tsunade spoke in a low growl. "Which limb would you like to lose first?" By this point, Anbu had arrived at the door to the office to defend their beloved Hokage, with the commander dragon at the head of the squad. Noticing who it was, he did his duty and made the logical decision. Anbu, retreat. A wise choice. Being made of sterner stuff, and also having the balls to attempt to quell Tsunade's fury, the original occupants stuck around. Tsunade Heim, what's the matter? Jiraiya prodded. Tsunade turned to Jiraiya with a life-ending look on her face. Do you know what this bastard did to me? Worried now, Hiruzen attempted to step in. Tsunade-chan, use your words now. Tsunade turned to Hiruzen. Words? Don't talk to me of words. This son of a bitch here should take that advice. She shook the dead Minato to get her point across, and not his. Well, Jiraiya and Hiruzen certainly didn't expect that. Sporting bewildered looks for a moment, they both said at the exact same time. What? Minato let his tongue hang out for good measure to try and make his act seem more believable. Jiraiya, being a creature of habit, let his mind roam. While not drawing any conclusions, he did begin to blush and giggle. My Heim, if it's male genitalia you're after, I could be of service. Minato was momentarily dropped while Tsunade broke Jiraiya's everything. Ever the pacifist, Hiruzen tried to calm Tsunade down. Tsunade-chan, what's the matter? Jiraiya managed to lift his head slightly so that he could listen. Tsunade walked back over Minato and picked him up by the ankle and helped him upside down. This blonde bastard, she spat out, impregnated me. Pin drop silence. While Tsunade was about to preform the Iron Lotus with Minato but instead launch him halfway to the land of wind, Shizune came charging in. No Tsunade-sama, it's not good for the baby. That really hit it home for Jiraiya and Hiruzen. Tsunade did seem to calm down at this and dropped Minato. Minato rose to his feet. His mind was moving faster than his flying Raijin. Impregnated. Woman. Pregnant woman. Tsunade is a woman. A pregnant woman now. The unspeakable event. Father. The silence was interrupted by raucous laughter coming from the threshold where the office occupants looked up to see Kushina laughing. She was leaning forward holding her stomach while pointing at Tsunade. You too? Minato had always prided himself on having some semblance of honor. As much honor as a cheating, conniving, backstabbing shinobi could have. However, when he learned that he managed to get not only his beloved wife Kushina pregnant, but also Tsunade of the Sannin, he lost that honor. Tsunade wouldn't admit it to Minato, however she was excited. Perhaps her maternal hormones were kicking in early but she already loved the little meat sack cooking in her womb. Kushina was downright ecstatic. It was all she'd talk about with whoever she could tell and whoever would listen. Of course this led to some interesting scenarios, one of which occurred whilst at the Ichiraku's ramen stand, where the adorable little Ayame asked the dreaded question of, where do babies come from? Kushina attempted the cabbage patch, Tucci the stork and Tsunade, well never being one to beat around the bush, gave little Ayame a medical rundown of the whole procedure. Ayame has yet to speak to her father. Tsunade, as she had been, was unwilling to stay in the village hidden in the leaves. So, she stayed in one of the small towns that surrounds the great village. Minato would visit daily. Regardless of the different mothers, he'd be there for both of the children no matter what. He often found himself believing that this was the real reason for the invention of the flying Raijin. Shizune had to work overtime to ensure that Tsunade didn't indulge in any vices. She'd be damned if she let her little brother or sister be corrupted or harmed by her teacher whilst still in the womb. She didn't say that out loud of course, however her doting, servant attitude spoke volumes. 9 weeks after the reveal, it was time for the ultrasound. It had been decided that when it came time for Tsunade to go into labor, she would be brought back to the village to give birth in the hospital. As was the same with checkups and the like. Kushina and Tsunade went together along with Minato. By this point, both Tsunade and Kushina were sporting noticeable bumps. This was all done in secret of course, as were it common knowledge, it would be like throwing out an invitation to the other villages that said, come stop the Yondaime's brood from developing. So both Kushina and Tsunade were teleported to the hospital room by Minato. Tsunade and Kushina had become very close. Kushina would often accompany Minato when he'd visit Tsunade and the soon-to-be mothers already planned to raise both of their children as brothers or sisters. The trio's doctor was none other than Shizune. She had always wanted to work on the labor ward. She also wants a baby now. Where's Kakashi when you need him? Kushina went first. You'll be pleased to know that your baby girl is healthy as can be. Kushina was overjoyed. A little girl. She couldn't wait to talk about boys. Couldn't wait to cuddle all day and night. Couldn't wait to clean up and kiss better any cuts and bruises. Couldn't wait to charge her up on sugar as she was leaving for a mission or something similar and then drop her off in Minato's office. She couldn't wait. Hearing Kushina's verdict once more reinforced the reality that Minato was going to be a father, and that Tsunade was also going to be a mother. Your baby boy is as strong as can be. Tsunade was having a son. She was over the moon. A little boy. Maybe he'd be the shy cuddly type, or maybe he'd be the adventurous daring type. Either way, Tsunade couldn't wait to meet him. On October 9th, Minato's chakra homing seal that he has placed on each of his tri-pronged kunai went off like a jackhammer in his head. The chakra homing seal would alert Minato to someone channeling chakra through it. Reaching out mentally, Minato felt the kunai just outside the village. In a small settlement, where Tsunade happened to be staying. The seal was only supposed to be used in case of an emergency. Or labor. Minato first teleported home. He told Kushina of what was going on and told her to meet him and Tsunade at the hospital. Then Minato teleported to Tsunade. When Minato appeared in a yellow flash, Tsunade was standing, holding her stomach whilst being supported by Shizune, taking deep breaths. Shizune was holding a bag that held clothes, blankets and all manner of baby products. Her water broke. Shizune shouted, trying to rein in her panic. Minato teleported the three to their personal hospital room. Tsunade was laid down and dressed into a hospital gown, begrudgingly with Minato's help, as Shizune got dressed into hospital scrubs. During this time, the very pregnant Kushina had arrived as well. It was in the early hours of the 10th of October when, after a C-section, Naruto Senju was born. He had sun-kissed blonde hair, much like his father's, and glowing, figuratively, forest green eyes. When Tsunade held her son for the first time, after being thoroughly cleaned of blood, Tsunade felt love once more. Unconditional love. When he came out, Naruto was crying and screaming. That was until he was placed onto his mother's chest. Whilst he was lying on Tsunade's chest, the mother-son pair made eye contact. Forest green stared into chocolate brown. Tsunade decided then and there that there was no price that would be too expensive for her baby. Exhausted and weak from labor, Tsunade had to be put to sleep in order to recover. In the meantime, Minato held his son. The tiny bundle of joy warmed his heart. Kushina saw Naruto, the child of her husband, with another woman, and even she fell in love. Chubby little cheeks and wide open eyes staring all around the room, which landed on her. Perhaps this was one of those otherworldly moments, where some ethereal being played his or her hand. However, when Naruto cracked an adorable little smile at Kushina, whilst looking at her belly, Kushina's waters broke. Minato wouldn't be sleeping tonight. Kushina had to be moved to a remote location in order to give birth. As the chances of the nine tails escaping was especially high when a woman was in labor. Kushina was in labor from the time Naruto was born in the early hours of the 10th of October to 9 o'clock at night. Minato was in a right old state. His hand had already been crushed by Tsunade, and now Kushina was crushing his hand while the other worked overtime in order to keep the nine tails at bay. Outside the cave where Kushina's wails could be heard, Anbu were patrolling. All was quiet in the night. Too quiet. Tsunade awoke with a start. She felt pure, cold, unbridled fear. She hadn't felt fear in a long time. She was being transported on her hospital bed by Shizune. She knew not where she was, but she knew where she was going. The Hokage Monument. The evacuation point. Naruto. She looked to the side and saw Shizune. When she went to talk, her voice caught in her throat. She knew something was wrong. Shizune. What's happening? Where's Naruto? Tsunade shouted as loud as she could in her bleary state. Shizune was hoping that her master would stay asleep. After all, how do you tell somebody that her child was taken, and that the nine-tailed fox was his destination? Shizune stopped. Luckily there was nobody around. The nine tails appeared in the village. Shizune clenched her eyes shut as tears ran down her face. Tsunade knew what this meant. Shizune, where is my son? Tsunade needed an answer. She hadn't been with him long, as she needed to sleep, however, in those short moments. She knew she'd do anything for her baby. Minato came to the hospital. Implications started whirling in her mind. Did he run away with her baby? He said he needed Naruto and Mito to save the village. Tsunade's heart stopped. She knew now. Ninja art creation rebirth. Strength of 100 technique. Tsunade's forehead seal glowed, before it disappeared, and in its place, black lines ran over her face. Instantly feeling renewed, Tsunade rose from the bed, against the wishes of Shizune. Luckily she was dressed, must have been Shizune. Tsunade took off. When she got to the nearest roof, she spotted the big Chungus. 9 thrashing tails, eyes as red as blood, fur orange like fire. It was a travesty. There was carnage and chaos and destruction nearly everywhere she looked. Her brain told her to run, that she couldn't face such a behemoth, but her heart instantly killed such thoughts. She ran for the one place where she thought her baby would be. The front line. Sarutobi Hiruzen was catching his breath. How the fox got out he didn't know. All he knew was that it was here now. Enma in staff form was leant against his shoulder. He'd managed to push the beast back, but it mattered little. Where was Minato? Looking around he saw something not entirely foreign to him, but heartbreaking and demoralizing all the same. Death. It was everywhere. The fox was merciless. With a swipe of its claws, friends, family members, lovers were wiped out. Not even making an impact. Just there as cannon fodder to draw the fox's attention for the briefest of seconds. Who would remember them? As horrible as he felt about it, he knew he wouldn't. So who would? If nobody would, then what was the point? Someone landing next to him drew his attention. He saw the last person he expected to see. Tsunade was there with her anti-death seal activated. Where's Minato? She roared. Hiruzen wished he knew that. Well, ask and you shall receive. An enormous toad dropped from the sky and landed on top of the 9 tails. Watching in awe and anticipation, Minato, Gamabunta and the 9 tails all disappeared in a yellow flash. The shinobi roared and cheered in victory and for their Hokage. But Hiruzen knew it wasn't over yet. He could still sense the beast, far away, but it was still there. As could Tsunade. Without saying a word, the two disappeared and ran for where they knew the beast was. Ever since he could remember, Minato had always wanted a family. Growing up as an orphan, he longed for a mother's love, a father's approval, a sibling's rivalry, a grandparent's doting. He wanted it all, and when he learned that both Kushina and Tsunade were pregnant with his children, he would be there for them. He wouldn't let his children be alone and long for the same things he did. As the loneliness was crushing and cold and merciless, it didn't let up, constantly there as a reminder that he meant nothing to no one, and if he died, no one would care. Morbid, but the truth. He wanted his kids to know that they were loved and cared for, that they mattered. And yet what he was about to do. He hated himself for it. Pinning his 2 innocent children with such a burden. They hadn't even had their first feed yet. Little Naruto. Tsunade was reluctant to let her baby be called Naruto, as she learned of its origin being from one of Jiraiya's books. But she read the book Tales of the Utterly Gutsy Ninja and agreed with the name. His hopes for his little boy were that he would grow up to be just like his namesake and would protect and strive for peace in this war-ravaged world. Little Mito. She was named after the first Hokage's wife and Tsunade's grandmother. She was going to be the spitting image of Kushina when she grew up, but with his sapphire eyes. How he wished he could be there to scare off boys. Well, actually, if she was going to be like Kushina, he wouldn't need to. But still, he wanted to be there to walk her down the aisle and to watch her grow. Minato resigned to his fate. He finished the hand seals. He had drawn the seals in blood, his blood, onto his children. His legacy. Kushina next to him had her chains out holding down the fox. Why did this have to go so wrong? If Minato was the superstitious type, he'd curse that masked bastard 1,000 times over, but he wasn't. Speaking of superstition, actually, he felt the ethereal hand reach into him. He looked up and came face to face with death. The Shinigami. He didn't really care about that, however. He didn't care about any endless suffering he may have to endure. As long as his children lived. Barely 10 meters away, Tsunade and Hiruzen landed. Tsunade spotted her baby, and another whom she assumed was Mito. No, I should be the one doing that. Hiruzen growled. What do you mean? Tsunade demanded. She tried to walk forward, but to her horror, she walked straight into a barrier that repelled her. Those hand seals, it's the Fuinjutsu. Dead demon consuming seal. It summons the Shinigami itself to seal something away. In this case the 9 tails, Hiruzen explained, defeated. He is the old and Minato is the new. It should be him in there doing the sealing, but it's not. As payment, the caster's soul will be consumed by the Shinigami. Tsunade was at a loss. Her baby, barely a day old, was going to have that sealed inside him? Never had she hated more in her life. She hated Minato for what he was doing. She didn't care if it was necessary for the survival of the village. Bringing her baby into this, it was inexcusable. She went to smash down the barrier, to feed Minato to the fox. But before she could, all hate was dashed. In its place was relief. The fox managed to get free of its bonds. In a deep guttural voice, it roared out that it refused to be sealed again. He went to kill the 2 infants on the sealing altar. They needed to die, had to die. But before the claw struck, Minato and Kushina threw themselves in the way of the claw, impaling themselves upon it, stopping the attack and saving the infants. Tsunade saw the blood, but she didn't care, for in that moment she was cured of her hemophilia. Seeing Minato and Kushina give up their lives for her baby, Minato had repented in her eyes. Even if she wanted to do it herself, kill Minato that is. In the next moments, the fox was sealed. Half in Mito and half in Naruto. The barrier dropped with Kushina and Minato. She approached and swept up her baby, running all manner of diagnostics. She also checked Mito. "Peek off please Tsunade, watch Mito, please look after her," Kushina wheezed out. How she was still alive was beyond Tsunade. She pinned it down to Uzumaki resilience. Seeing the pleading look in the eyes of the dying woman, Tsunade couldn't refuse. She would raise Mito just like she would Naruto. Tsunade took Mito up in her other hand. Both babies were fast asleep, sleeping off their vulpine meal. "I will," Tsunade reassured. Kushina smiled. Of all smiles Tsunade had seen in her life, all paled in comparison to the feelings and emotions in Kushina's last smile. Resigned to death but overjoyed at the fact that her baby would be cared for and loved. She didn't care about the village in that moment, her past, the hole in her stomach, even Minato was second best. Mito meant everything, she was Kushina's world in her final moments. Tears fell out of joy. Death is often considered the end of life. And in our own perspectives, life is everything. Nothing means more than life. And for it to end, is the end of everything for a person. No matter who they are, regardless of everything that they were in life. They could be evil, good, cruel or loving. In the end it doesn't matter. For the end consumes us and our everything becomes nothing, snuffed out like a candlelight. That's what life is for, making sure that there is something after we're gone, some sort of mark that says, "I was here." Kushina knew this was her end. But she didn't care. It was her baby's beginning. Regardless of circumstance or how it begins, it doesn't matter. What does is how it turns out. And as long as her baby got to live, that meant everything to her. Hiruzen, please transfer all possessions and assets to Tsunade. Kushina's last words were in hopes that her baby would grow up and have all that she would be given from her parents. With her last words, Kushina Uzumaki breathed her last. Silence reigned for a time. Hiruzen and Tsunade stood and watched the bodies of the 4th Hokage and his wife move everything to the Senju compound. Even the things in the archives and vaults. All of it. Then have Jiraiya seal the compound. Tsunade spoke, "Naruto and Mito don't exist. We'll leave the village." Hiruzen could only nod numbly. Luckily everything wouldn't be hard to explain. Moving all Uzumaki accounts to the Senju is understandable, being relatives. And in the Uzumaki accounts, he could slip all Namikaze assets into the Senju as well. At least bring them to the village at some point. They deserve to see the home their father gave his life for. That struck a chord with Tsunade. Could she in good conscience spit of Minato's sacrifice by never bringing his children to the home he gave his life for? Honestly, no she couldn't. "Okay," she whispered in a small voice. Whispering a final prayer to the fallen couple, she turned and walked away. "Come on Mito-chan, Naru-chan. You must be hungry," Hiruzen heard as she walked away. Wiping a stray tear from his face, he collected the bodies and also turned away. A few weeks after the Nine Tails attack, we find Shizune and Tsunade taking a break in a small village in the middle of nowhere southwest of the Hidden Leaf, near the border of river country. The village was in a word, generic. It was a simple farming village, surrounded by hills and fields that were used to sustain the village. A small stream ran nearby which was the source of the village's water. The buildings were built from wood and were 2 stories high with thatched roofing. Generic. Tsunade and Shizune were currently staying in the village's inn. Parenthood has been treating the pair unkindly. Little Naruto was, well for lack of a better word, a cry baby. Ironic. All he did was cry and cry and cry some more. It drove the short-fused Tsunade up the wall. The only way to get him to stop crying was for Tsunade to cuddle him. So Tsunade would always be found holding Naruto so that he doesn't start crying. He was a complete and utter mama's boy. Mito on the other hand was, well, allowed. She didn't cry, she shouted. The pipes on that child were incredible. She was always wriggling, shouting and kicking. She would only sit still for feeding. Courtesy of Tsunade. Mito always wanted to be moving, and so, Shizune would often have to be walking around at all times to appease the little red-headed terror. Even at these incredibly early stages of their lives, it was already obvious who would be the leader of the two. When they were laid down next to each other, for changing, or when Shizune and Tsunade needed a break from holding the two, Mito was the one who lost patience first and would rope Naruto into her shenanigans. Which was shouting and kicking. The two were barely 3 weeks old, and yet, the two were extraordinarily connected and in sync. Not only that, but the two were amazingly energetic. As long as Tsunade was in sight in Naruto's case, strong genes Tsunade and Shizune pegged it down to. Shizune loved every minute with the two. Despite their quirks, the two were adorable. They could probably make a rude shinobi feel again with their big sparkly eyes and chubby little cheeks. Shizune was particularly fond of their chubby cheeks. Tsunade missed alcohol. Hidden leaf. Repairs were coming along slowly. The people were too broken to get anything done. They had no outlet for their grief and no real incentive to work, despite the chance of an invasion from one of the other villages being a looming threat due to being left in a weak state by the Nine Tails attack. The only reason they managed to get anything done was because the Sandaime retook the reins of the village. The death of the Yondaime was a heavy blow. Minato was a symbol of hope. I mean, you don't single-handedly wipe out an entire army and become anything less. So without him around, morale was low. In light of such events, reparations came first, everything else second. So as such, council meetings had only been about emergency protocol and ensuring survival. Until now. Where is the Jinchuriki? Leave it to Danzo to ask what didn't need to be asked and cause chaos as a result. This single question caused an uproar in both the civilian council and parts of the shinobi council. Hiruzen thought about his options. He could enact Minato's Z-class secret. That'd be awfully convenient right about now, however this would make the people question him. And undermining authority is the last thing he needs right now. Somebody harbors that demon. They must be killed, shouted random people whom of which Hiruzen couldn't be bothered to remember. Flaring his chakra, the room became quiet. There isn't one. This resulted in more questions. And arguments. No Jinchuriki. We need one to be a deterrent. Hiruzen could concede to that point. Good riddance. The beast is gone. Not quite. Hiruzen, Biju can't be killed. What happened to the Nine Tails? Would it be irresponsible of him to slap Danzo? Probably. But he does have a very sloppable face. Minato used a forbidden kinjutsu to seal the beast inside of himself. He paused for dramatic effect. And the beast died with him. A complete lie. I've still got it being the ability to lie. Maybe he shouldn't be proud of that. Amazingly, Danzo kept his mouth shut. Perhaps he caught the lie, or perhaps he believed him. After all, Minato was rather spontaneous. And extreme. It's not like we've needed one in the past. Shikaku actually spoke. Will wonders never cease? Yes, but still. Having one around is being safer than sorry, Sume spoke. Hiruzen didn't know which side to take. On the one hand, not having one is good, as potential rampages are reduced to a preferable 0. On the other, they do make a decent deterrent. Hang on a second. Nobody even knew about Mito and Kushina being Jinchuriki, so how the hell would they know if it's good to have one or not? That's not our primary concern at the moment. What is that we need to rebuild and also attempt to stave off any chance of the other villages attempting to breach our borders, Hiruzen said, bringing the focus of the council back onto him. We cannot appear weak. So, Fugaku, seeing as the Uchiha were the least hit by the Nine Tails, all able Uchiha will return to active duty and start taking missions, as will you clan heads and any clansmen that can be spared, and all Chunin and higher-ranked shinobi. Genin along with able-bodied civilians will continue to help rebuild the village. Also, I'll be in contact with Jiraiya and I'll see to it that he works overtime to gather information on the other villages, so that we're not caught flat-footed. Saying that in his stern, God of Shinobi, Hokage voice left little room for argument. Taking a gamble. I'd like academy students to help the genin as well. Reasonable. But maybe a little excessive? Who cares, quicker the village is fixed the better. Adjourned. Rising and leaving the council room, Hirazen's mind drifted to Tsunade. Those kids she has will be something else when they're older. He couldn't wait to meet them. Maybe he should ask Jiraiya to ferry gifts and the like to get into their good graces, and by extension the villages. Emotions and men. They're an odd mixture. For a man, emotions are pushed into the dark crevices of the mind and left there, being untouched. But every now and then, male emotions will creep back into the light and wreak havoc upon them. That's why men cry. Because the bottled-up emotions become too much and crying is the only outlet. The tears are the emotions themselves. All the pain, sadness and grief dripping down the cheeks, leaving an everlasting invisible scar upon the face. Jiraiya had lost much in his life. Comrades, a teammate, parents, a student who may as well have been a son. That's why the tears fell as he stood over the graves of Minato and Kushina. This was just one of those moments where it became too much. Jiraiya had of course been hardened by life. So, he'd only ever cry over something once, to bleed the excess emotions away from his mind and work with a clear head afterwards. He couldn't be prouder of Minato for his sacrifice, and he'd never forget it. But he has to move on. Turning away from the graves, tears dry and emotions drained, he had one destination in mind. He'd put out the word to keep an eye out for enemy movements, but he had to see them. His student's legacy. 6 months old, Naruto was still a chronic mama's boy, and Mito was even more energetic. The two had grown. Shizune and Tsunade had also grown. Older, figuratively. Sleepful nights were few and far between. Naruto had to be near Tsunade and Mito didn't need sleep. Okay, you two, time for feeding. Unbinding her top, Tsunade felt the two latch on. Sighing and sitting back, Tsunade closed her eyes and rested. Shizune was at the local hot spring having some much-needed R&R. Tsunade couldn't go all that often as she had to take Naruto with her. She loved her baby boy more than anything, but she did wish he wasn't so clingy. She hasn't had any sake in nearly 2 years now. She got into a lot of shouting matches with Shizune over it over the past month as she tried to indulge. Damn goody two shoes. Tsunade's sixth sense began to tingle. She was being watched. She could hear, very faint, but very clear giggling. A tick mark appeared on her forehead. Feeding time was the only time she could get the babies to stop making any noise, and now that was being interrupted by some perv. She dropped a kunai hidden in her sleeve into her hand. With a flick of the wrist at lightning speed, the kunai launched out of her hand and strayed through the window. Tsunade heard a satisfying grunt that sounded familiar. Opening her eyes, she looked to the window to see an irritated Jiraiya. Hey, you could have killed me, if Tsunade wasn't feeding right now. Oh great, what the hell are you doing here? Jiraiya's irritation swiftly disappeared and in its place was the all-too-familiar mirthful glint that was both infuriating and begrudgingly lovable. Oh you know, Uncle Jiraiya. He was cut off having to duck from another kunai. And who said you could be an uncle? Like a mole, Jiraiya peeped over the windowsill. Acquaintance? Jiraiya asked meekly. Better. Tsunade responded all too sweetly. Jiraiya hopped into the house through the window. How's motherhood treating you? Jiraiya asked, trying to keep his eyes on Tsunade's. He was painfully and obviously failing. Tsunade was too tired to care. Poorly. Baby A is clingy and refuses to be away from me for longer than 10 seconds. She lifted Naruto for extra effect. And baby B has no off switch. She did the same with Mito. Jiraiya took note of Tsunade's baggy eyes and worn-out demeanor. He decided to earn himself some brownie points. I can watch them if you want while you sleep, Jiraiya offered. Did you not hear what I said about Naruto? Tsunade asked deadpanned. I know, I'll just use a transformation. Tsunade looked at Jiraiya. Honestly, she wished she thought of that earlier. Lack of sleep must be getting to her. But not being one to look a gift horse in the mouth, when she finished feeding and burping the two, she gave the babies to Jiraiya and bolted. Holding both babies whilst being transformed, Jiraiya got to really look at the two. They both had content look on their little faces. Jiraiya had to admit, they were both very cute. Naruto had gorgeous forest green eyes. Mito's were a deep ocean blue. These two were the future. He could feel it. They were destined for greatness. The looks he was seeing in their eyes, it was almost like they knew as well. They both had looks of determination. Well, that's how Jiraiya perceived it anyway. Mito started shouting and Naruto started crying. Oh boy. 5 years later, a young girl with straight shoulder-length red hair was charging through a forest. At her heel was a boy with sun-kissed spiky blonde hair. The two were in an intense game of ninja and Naruto was it. As such, he had to try and catch Mito. He never did. They left the forest and raced through the streets of the town they were staying in at the moment. They kept going until they came to a single-story house on the outskirts of the village on the opposite side to the forest. Mito reached the house first. "Ha, I win again," she cheered with her chin up and hands on hips. "I almost got you that time." Naruto tried to argue, although he knew it was useless, especially with his sister. "Yeah right, slowpoke." Mito laughed. She felt waves of depression emanating. She sighed, crouched next to a tree, poking the floor with his head down and a dark cloud above his head. Naruto was having another moment. "I tried my hardest," Mito heard him mutter. "I'm sure you'll get me next time." Mito resigned defeatedly. As quick as it came, the depressing aura was gone and Naruto was back in front of her with a big smile on his face. "Yeah, I'll get you next time." Naruto cheered. Mito wore a small smile. "Come on Naru, if you want to be a good shinobi like Dad and the rest of our family, you gotta man up." Mito tried to motivate by pumping her fist into the air. Having been told countless stories of heroism from their big sister, mother and uncle, the pair had plenty of dreams of grandeur. Though this is naive, the two didn't really care. They wanted to be like their awesome dad who could teleport and their great-grandfather who could grow trees from nothing. Truthfully, the pair weren't all that impressed by the infamous wood release when they were told about it, but Uncle Jiraiya said it was cool and that it could do loads of stuff, so they were swayed. "Hey, I'm man enough." Naruto tried to argue. It was pointless, he never won against his sister. Sighing, Mito just patted and rubbed his head. She may have been born second, but she was definitely more mature. "Come on, Shizzy will probably be mad if we're late for dinner." Shizzy is what Mito affectionately nicknamed hers and Naruto's big sister Shizune. Smiling and nodding, the pair entered the house they were staying in. "Hey Mom," Naruto greeted as he ran in and tackled Tsunade into a hug. Tsunade returned the hug. "Hey Naru-chan, you have fun playing with Mito?" Naruto was still a massive mama's boy. Shamelessly so. Jiraiya and Mito tried to ward Naruto away from the childish phase, however it didn't work. Sighing again, Mito took initiative and went to see if Shizune needed any help. Mito was definitely the more mature of the two, although she had a vicious temper, something she inherited from her mother. Both of them. Mito was aware of Kushina. She knew that Tsunade wasn't her real mother and that Naruto was only her half-brother, but she didn't care much. Of course she'd love Kushina if she were here, but she was also happy with what she had. When dinner was finished, Shizune and Mito served. "So, do you two still want to be ninja?" Tsunade asked. "Yes," was the immediate enthusiastic response from Mito and Naruto. Tsunade was and always will be reluctant to train her babies to become ninja, however she just couldn't say no to the two. She also knew that they'd have to know how to defend themselves. She just had to keep telling herself that it was for their own good. "Well, Jiraiya should be along tomorrow and we can get started on your training, how does that sound?" She had sent Jiraiya to the Hidden Leaf to retrieve any and all scrolls and weapons from the Senju compound. If her babies were going to be in danger, she'd prepare them properly and arm them to the teeth. Better safe than sorry. That sounds awesome. They cheered in unison. In truth, she had already bore witness to some impressive ninja attributes in the both of them. They both had lightning-quick reflexes and obscene amounts of stamina. They both also had a lot of agility. She wouldn't be surprised if Mito and Naruto could already outdo some genin even now. "And I'll be starting your education." Shizune chimed in. Both Mito and Naruto winced. They had to agree to being schooled if they wanted to be trained. "Now Mito, you'll be training in the Uzumaki techniques while Naru will be doing the Senjus," Tsunade explained. They both liked this agreement. Mito and Naruto had been told about their respective mothers' clans. They were given a choice as to who they wanted to represent and Mito chose the Uzumaki while Naruto the Senju. There were some things they were going to both be learning however, those being the Uzumaki's sealing techniques and the Senju's ninjutsu techniques. "We know. And don't you worry Mom, we'll be great ninja, right Naru?" "Right." The first order of business when starting ninja training is to first condition the body. While Naruto and Mito were well above average when it came to strength and stamina for kids their age, Tsunade and Jiraiya made sure that they weren't just above average. While Tsunade would have wanted to condition the two so that they were on par with Jonin, Jiraiya settled for Genin level. The two could easily go toe-to-toe with Genin in endurance, which was an amazing feat for a pair of 5-year-olds. So after 6 weeks of conditioning, the two were started in their respective clans' taijutsu styles. Naruto got started on the Senju's Nature Fist. The style was a much more advanced version of the Academy style. Because the Senju clan were the clan of 1,000 skills, each member branched out and built upon the Nature Fist to suit their own needs. Hence why it was called the Nature Fist. Because it is natural to the user. Mito on the other hand got started on the Uzumaki's Whirling Fist style. The Whirling Fist style was a painfully tricky style to utilize. It required incredible flexibility and agility. The user, like a maelstrom, would count on momentum from swift pirouettes to primarily kick opponents. Not only that, but the user also had to be very good at acrobatics. The style was unpredictable, hence why it was so dangerous. The two had to first master the stances and kata of their individual styles. Taijutsu was something that was mastered over time through use and experience. So as soon as the kata was down, the duo would spar to gain a firmer grasp on their styles. Naruto decided to create a spontaneous variation of the Nature Fist. It was in truth a bastardized version of the Drunken Fist after Naruto witnessed a drunken brawl in the street once. Naruto's style counted on quick, precise movements and versatility to lead opponents into making mistakes wherein he delivered devastating counters. Well, as devastating as a 5-year-old could be. Mito on the other hand took to the Whirling Fist like a fish to water. She had the grace of a swan and the balance of a cat. In a few years' time, Mito would be a master of the style and would be nigh on unbeatable. And when she unlocked her chakra and began enhancing her movements, she would be a force to be reckoned with. The two showed amazing promise in taijutsu. Probably to appease Tsunade so that they could unlock their chakra quicker and start learning awesome jutsu. Shizune started the pair on their education. They learned the regular subjects like maths, science, English and chakra theory. Shizune also made a point to teach the pair the ins and outs of the human anatomy. Of course Tsunade and Shizune were upset that the pair wouldn't be able to become medics due to a certain fox, but it didn't mean they couldn't learn first aid and potentially become even more dangerous through knowing where it hurts and where kills the quickest. And finally, Jiraiya started the both on Fuinjutsu, which they took to like a fish to water. They were both prodigies in the art. Within the first 4 weeks they could make their own storage scrolls, which was unheard of. Fridays would be an exam day of sorts. Mito and Naruto would be tested on what they've learned and would also have a spar. The two had to pass these tests if they wanted to advance at all and press on towards the eventual goal of unlocking their chakra. Naruto blocked a kick aimed to the head. He narrowed his stance and sprung to the side of Mito while her leg was still in the air. He kicked her back leg that was still on the floor. Following through with the momentum of the kick, Mito flipped onto her hands and lifted herself off of the floor and countered with a kick while mid-air and upside down. Naruto leant back to dodge. Seeing his brief moment of inactivity, Mito placed her hands on the ground again and twisted into another pirouette handstand where she lashed out with another powerful kick. Naruto widened his stance and crossed his arms over his face as to absorb the impact of the blow. Despite being a complete crybaby, Naruto completely changes personalities when in battle. He becomes focused and serious. A welcome change in Mito's opinion. Landing back on her feet, after kicking Naruto and forcing him to slide back, she once more assumed her stance. "Stay your attack," Tsunade called the duel. She was satisfied. The two relaxed and smiled at each other. The pair were evenly matched. "Okay, I think it's time." Tsunade begrudgingly decided that it was time to unlock their chakra. While she'd prefer to do this only after they could defeat Gamabunta in a taijutsu battle, she'd have to settle for this. Even so, she had to admit, the pair were good. Not prodigies because they would be ready already if they were, however they were way above average. Really? No joke? Tsunade, although unwilling, couldn't deny the excited gleam in their eyes. "Yes, now, sit down, cross-legged, and assume a meditative position." The duo did as instructed, then close your eyes. Just in case the pair had much more chakra than they should, Jiraiya had set up a chakra masking barrier around the perimeter of their residence. You just never could be sure when it came to the fox. Now listen closely, both of you. She received 2 nods as assurance. I want you to focus on everything by focusing on nothing. Don't just latch onto one thing. Breathe deeply and evenly and just take it all in. Be at peace with your surroundings and let your senses flow. You must remain centered, concentrate, and don't lose focus. You should be able to feel a warmth throughout your body. Trace the warmth to your center of mass or your stomach. Once you feel the knot of warmth, untangle it. People's ways of describing the feeling of chakra is different for everyone. This was how she sees it. After 30 minutes of meditation, both Mito and Naruto could feel it. They focused on their centers and smoothed out the knot. They immediately felt the warmth intensify. It wasn't unbearable for either of them. It was like seeing a whole new world through different eyes. Mito could immediately tell something was different. She could feel. Vague, but she could just feel. She knew that there were things, people around her. It was like there were beacons of light in the darkness of her closed eyes. Each beacon varied in intensity, shape, pattern, warmth, color, and emotion. She didn't understand it, but it was like feelings were projected to her. She knew what awe felt like, as she had been in awe when Uncle Jiraiya demonstrated jutsu. Where Tsunade was stood, she could feel awe coming off of her in waves. Naruto, on the other hand, felt much more in tune. It was like he was a part of his surroundings, like he was a tree standing tall in a forest, nature flowing all around him. He could feel the stream a ways off, flowing seamlessly. He could feel ground beneath him nurturing and nourishing the land around him. He didn't want to move, it was beautiful. He could just get lost in nature. He would have too were it not for Tsunade shouting for him. When Naruto opened his eyes, he was enshrouded in green. Is this chakra? It was so calming and warm, like hugging his mom. When Mito opened her eyes, she was enshrouded in a deep oceanic blue. It was thick and dense, yet soothing. She could still feel everything around her. She assumed it was chakra, like a sixth sense. She could feel the warmth and calm of her brother. It was intoxicating, so warm. She could feel her mother's. It was prickly, but also gentle and smooth. She liked this ability. Tsunade was awestruck. It takes a lot of chakra to be able to make it visible in its pure form. Hence why jutsu like the Rasengan were so taxing, because they were pure chakra. Pure chakra was coming off of the twins in droves. It was incredible. They had more chakra than most experienced chunin. They're 5. That was unheard of. Incredible. She needed to quickly stop them so that they don't blast out all their chakra and exhaust themselves. Mito, Naruto, you've got to force it down. Draw the chakra back into yourself. Following their mother's instructions, they drew their chakra back into themselves. Now they could feel their chakra permanently, like a constant tug at the back of their minds, just waiting to be used. When they rose to their feet, the ground beneath them felt uneven. Looking down, they saw that they'd left spider web-shaped cracks in the ground. Mum, why's that happened? Mito inquired. That's because of how dense your chakra is, Tsunade began. Because you two have so much chakra, its density acted like a weight that was too heavy for the ground to sustain and cracked as a result. Mito and Naruto just nodded. You two have more chakra than most chunin, which is incredible. Mito's and Naruto's faces lit up at this. Now, how do you feel? Tsunade had to find any additional abilities if any were present. I can feel? Sense. I think it's like, when I close my eyes, I know where you are and how you're feeling. It's difficult to explain. Tsunade's eyes widened. She knew of that ability. Mito, that's a natural sensory ability. My grandmother Mito had the exact same ability. Natural sensors are rare but incredibly useful. We'll have to train you to properly utilize it. It would seem the name, Mito Uzumaki, had some special effects. Awesome. Mito cheered. What about you, Naru-chan? Naruto crinkled his brow, tilted his head upwards, folded an arm across his chest and brought a finger to his chin in thought. This was Naruto's thinking pose. AKA, his adorable pose. I can't sense anything, but I feel more in tune with my surroundings, if that makes sense. Naruto started, his brow furrowed further. Like, nature feels natural to me, if that makes sense. Tsunade narrowed her brows. That sounded familiar. That's how her grandfather described his view on things. She took out a small slip of paper from her jacket pocket. She had chakra paper with her as she wanted to learn what natural affinities the twins had. Not that she was going to teach them jutsu, she just loved the mystery and reveal of an elemental affinity. She took out a second piece of paper. I just can't help myself, I want to know both of their affinities. Naru-chan, has Shizune covered elemental affinities? She received a shake of the head. Okay, listen closely. When we perform jutsu, we can do one of two things, or in some rare cases, both. We can alter the shape of our chakra and ultimately the jutsu, called chakra shape manipulation, or you can change the nature of our chakra to attune our chakra to an element and cast elemental jutsu, called chakra nature manipulation. She paused to see if they were following, getting a nod in response. We each have our own nature affinity, meaning that there's an element that we are most in tune with. That is our natural affinity. People can have more than one affinity, which usually means that they have a kekkei genkei, which is a type of chakra that is passed on through inheritance, but we'll cover that later. Of course, people can have two affinities without a kekkei genkei, but this is very rare. Does that mean that you can't do jutsu that you don't have a natural affinity for? Mito asked. She was always more astute than Naruto. No. An affinity only means that doing jutsu of that affinity are easier than doing jutsu that you don't have an affinity for, Tsunade answered. What are the affinities? Naruto asked. They are based on the 5 elements of the world. There's water, wind, earth, fire and lightning. Kekkei genkei are the fusion of 2 or more of these elements. She said she'd cover kekkei genkei later, but the opportunity presented itself. Now we can find out our elemental affinity through the use of this special paper. This is chakra paper, which has been tempered in chakra whilst still a tree and as a result, reacts to chakra affinities. Say if I have a fire affinity, can I develop another? Mito asked. Good question. The answer is yes, but it's a lot harder than developing a natural affinity and takes quite some time. Hence why only Jonin really develop a second affinity unless they have a kekkei genkei. Tsunade was getting excited at finding out what affinities the twins had. Now to find out our affinities you must channel chakra into the chakra paper. I know you two have only just unlocked your chakra, but simply draw on your chakra and conductivity will do the rest. What does that mean? Naruto asked. Essentially when drawing on your chakra, it brings it to the surface which in turn allows it to emanate from you. Kinda like heat from a fire. You don't touch the fire but you can still feel the heat. Tsunade explained. Oh, I see now. Drawing on our chakra heats up the paper which allows it to tell us our elemental affinity. Naruto reassumed his thinking pose, but if we all heat up the paper, then doesn't that mean that we all have a fire affinity? No, you idiot. Our chakra travels into the paper by being transmitted through having been drawn on and in turn conducting it like lightning through water. Weren't you paying attention in science? Mito scolded. Now that her sensory ability had manifested, however, the depressing waves were almost suffocating. Naruto was now slumped over with a sad cloud over his head. I want to be wrong about this, but I just can't shake the feeling. His temperament, description of chakra. Hell, even his eyes all scream Hashirama, Tsunade thought. While she knew if her suspicions were true that her son would do incredible things in his life, it also meant that he'd be heavily sought after by everyone for experimentation. In marriage, she couldn't let that happen. Wouldn't. She'll make sure her son and daughter were ready. Now Naru-chan, it's alright. Here, why don't you channel your chakra through the paper? Spirits lifted by being able to learn what awesome jutsu he'll be able to do. Naruto took a piece of paper. Can I do mine too? Mito asked. She refused to be behind her brother in any way. Tsunade nodded and gave Mito the second piece of paper. Now, to tell what affinity you have. Tsunade paused to make sure she had their attention. If the paper scrunches up into a ball, you have a lightning affinity. If the paper becomes wet, you have a water affinity. If the paper catches fire, you have a fire affinity. If the paper splits into 2, you have a wind affinity, and if it crumbles into dust, you have an earth affinity. You can also tell the strength of your given affinity depending on the intensity of the chakra paper's reaction. Now get to it. Drawing on her chakra, Mito could feel the warmth come to the surface like it was just under her skin. She could feel her chakra flow through her entire body. Like a muscle, she felt like in places she could tense or flex her chakra. Holding the paper in between her thumb and finger, she flexed the chakra in her digits and watched the paper. The paper was ripped to shreds. Well, Mito-chan, you have a wind affinity. And quite a strong one at that. That's incredibly rare, just about everywhere except for the land of wind, and even there it's not that common. As far as I know of, there were only 2 wind users in the hidden leaf when we left. Mito had a smug look on her face. She had the rarest affinity of them all. Naruto did the same, experiencing the same sensations as Mito, and he watched the paper. Half crumbled to dust, the other half became waterlogged and started to drip. Shit, Tsunade thought, not even noting the intensity of his water affinity. Just my cursed damned luck. Of course the two would be predisposed to being shinobi. Why wouldn't they be? One's going to be an obscenely powerful sensor while the other. I don't even want to think about it. Tsunade was seething. Well, maybe not seething, but she was upset nevertheless. Her babies Mito and Naruto both seemed to have such an aptitude for being a ninja that it would be a crime not to teach them the shinobi arts. Not to mention that they wanted to be, oh so awesome, ninja. Little did Tsunade know that her past 5 minutes of silence, all the while wearing a livid scowl on her face, unnerved the twins. Well, Mito was curious and Naruto was crying. These two will be Sannin level by the time they're 10, I'll make certain of that. Tsunade vowed. 3 years later. Run, faster you three. They'll catch us if you slow down. Tsunade, Shizune, Mito and Naruto were currently running away from a mob. Turns out, swindling gangsters then having a pair of 8-year-olds pull pranks on said gangsters is enough cause for a mob to form and bloody murder to be called for. Once again Tsunade managed to rack up some gambling debt, of which she naturally refused to pay and told the debt collectors where to shove it. Are you serious, woman? This is the 3rd town this month we've been run out of. How do you suck so bad? Mito roared in red-hot fury. Don't you take that tone with me, missy. You're just as much to blame for this as I am. Tsunade retorted. Mito's attitude had really began to stink these days. It's almost as though she keeps getting chased out of villages because her mother can't seem to save money. You're the one who threw eggs at that mob boss. They slipped out of my hand, honest. Tell her, Naru. The boss made Naru cry. So what if her fingers slipped whilst making a throwing motion towards aforementioned boss's head? Several times. In quick succession. Just run. Logical response from Naruto as an arrow landed next to him. Good thing they'd been doing tons of conditioning over the past few years. The four kept running until they were halfway to the next town, which was less than a few hours' walk away. When they finally reached the next town, they booked a room in the village's inn, having lost the mob along the country road. This had been quite a common occurrence over the last 3 years. In between training the twins, Tsunade continued to indulge in her vices. Much to Shizune's and Mito's dismay, Naruto refused to believe that his mother could do any wrong. Mama's boy. Speaking of training, the past 3 years have been very eventful for the twins. They continued to train and work hard. They primarily worked on chakra control, which was and still is the bane of the Jinchuriki's existence. They continued to master their taijutsu styles and also learned some jutsu along the way. The pair could very easily combat a seasoned chunin with their current skills. The pair had taken to kenjutsu in the years. Mito learning the Uzumaki Maelstrom sword style while Naruto learned the personal style of the Nidaime Hokage. The Uzumaki Maelstrom style complemented the taijutsu style. The two were meant to be used in conjunction as the taijutsu style revolves around kicks while having a sword in hand. The style capitalized in built-up momentum to strengthen slashes. The Nidaime style counted on stabs and mid-ranged blasts from the sword. Not to say that the style didn't account for close-range encounters, but the sharpness of the blade was meant to be utilized to disarm and dismember enemies. When Jiraiya brought scrolls from the Senju compound, he also brought items that could be used. 2 of those happened to be Kushina's katana. Kushina's katana had a primarily red handle with a black pommel that had the Uzumaki swirl engraved on it. The guard was also an Uzumaki swirl that was black like the pommel. The blade itself was also black, being made from chakra metal. The length of the blade was covered in various seals that Mito spent a month learning about. The katana, which was called Typhoon, was originally the blade of the head family of the Uzumaki clan, which Mito is now the heir to. The blade has been passed down since the Uzumaki clan's founding and has had a single wielder in each generation. Each wielder has added their own seal to the blade. There were seals that increased durability, making it near indestructible, made the blade permanently sharp, made chakra nature conductivity much easier, and so on. The sword itself held more power than even the 7 swords of the hidden mist. The seal that Kushina added created security measures on the sword in case someone tried to steal it. Only those permitted by the primary wielder were allowed to ever touch the sword. At some point, Mito would have to add her own seal. Naruto, on the other hand, didn't have a sword in the traditional sense. He was given, at first glance, a vajra that looked somewhat like the Senju clan symbol. Naruto had the Raijin no Ken, the sword of the thunder god. Naruto was able to learn to use the sword to its full potential through studying his great-granduncle's notes on the sword. Naruto's and Mito's kenjutsu clashes were quite destructive. Tsunade refused to allow the twins to be ninja unless they were on par with the Sage of Six Paths by the time they were 9. Sadly, the pair mainly had to count on each other for their kenjutsu practice, as none of their teachers' family used the sword. So they relied on each other and their summons. Flashback. The twins were celebrating their 8th birthday. They'd each received new clothes, equipment, and other gifts. However, they still had one very important gift still on the way. It arrived in the form of Jiraiya. "Hey brats, happy birthday," Jiraiya shouted as he burst through the open window of their current rented accommodation in the Land of Rivers. "Thanks pervy sage," the twins shouted simultaneously. The pair had learned of Jiraiya's less than desirable qualities and took appropriate action. Lots and lots of pranks. And name-calling. Jiraiya immediately face-faulted at the greeting. "Standing up, don't call me that," he shouted while shaking his fist. "Stop being a perv then," Mito argued. "Fat chance. This happened a lot." Mito arguing like this with Jiraiya. Tsunade couldn't be prouder. 20 minutes later, the pair had settled down and were acting civil once more. Shizune wondered what she'd be doing now. Were she still in the Hidden Leaf? Definitely not watching a legendary ninja argue with an 8-year-old, she thought with a shake of the head. "Anyway brats, come outside so I can give you my gift." He looked over to Tsunade for confirmation, who nodded at him. The ex-teammates decided that it would be best to have the twins sign the Toad summoning contract, as the slugs couldn't be utilized properly by either of them due to not being medics. Tsunade was heartbroken. Everyone followed Jiraiya outside. "Now, your gift from me is this." Jiraiya bit his thumb and performed some hand seals and slammed his hand onto the ground, summoning jutsu. A sealing array appeared on the floor, and at its center, a burst of white smoke appeared. When the smoke cleared, in its place stood a small orange toad. After this demonstration, Naruto and Mito were supposed to sign the contract on Jiraiya's back. Keyword, supposed to. While Mito stared in awe at the toad, Naruto had other ideas. "That was awesome. Let me try." Naruto bit his thumb and went through the same hand seal sequence as Jiraiya. Seeing this, the adults tried to stop him. "No Naruto, wait. Too late." Naruto had already slammed his hand onto the ground. Summoning jutsu. A cloud of smoke covered Naruto, and when it cleared, he was gone. Everyone stared at where Naruto used to be in shock. "That idiot." Tsunade roared in panic and rage. What happened?" Mito questioned. Jiraiya answered. "When someone who hasn't signed a summoning contract performs the jutsu, they get transported to the domain of the summoning creature they are most aligned to. However, not all summoning animals are exactly friendly and will attack you regardless of alignment. I got luck when I did it, as I ended up in the Toad's domain." Naruto, however, may not be so lucky, Jiraiya answered gravely. Tsunade has resorted to beating the hell out of the nearby rock formation while Shizune was trying to calm her down. "He'll be alright, won't he?" Mito asked with tears in her eyes. "I don't know," Jiraiya answered honestly. "There's nothing we can do but wait. If Naruto is okay, he'll reappear here where he was transported from. If not, well." Jiraiya trailed off. In the meantime, he pulled the Toad contract off of his back. "Mito, write your name here in blood and then make a handprint in blood underneath your name." Mito nodded slowly, still worried about Naruto, and did as she was told. "Good. Now you can summon the Toads to aid you, congratulations." Jiraiya tried to make Mito feel a little less worried about Naruto. It didn't work. With Naruto fell to the ground onto his back. Groaning, he sat up and looked around. He had no idea where he was. He couldn't see his family or their small house. He began to worry. Mito, pervy sage, shizzy. Is anyone there? He asked somewhat loudly. Taking in his surroundings, Naruto noticed he was somewhere high up. The grass was green. Thank goodness, Naruto thought. Wherever he was, it sure was beautiful if not a bit misty. In the direction he was facing, where the mist was thinnest allowing him to actually see, it looked like a forest that stretched for miles. Strangely, Naruto saw bamboo mixed in with the trees. Some of the bamboo shoots were as big as oak trees. There was a river that ran through the forest that sparkled blue, but Naruto couldn't see where it went. Naruto also saw enormous rock formations easily as big as mountains that seemed like huge stone stumps protruding from the ground. Naruto heard movement. Naruto's direct vicinity was enshrouded in mist and he couldn't see more than a few feet in front of him. Spinning towards the direction of the movement, Naruto saw nothing. Looking at his feet, he realized he was stood on a stone cobble path that had grass growing through the crack of the stone. There was also stone and wooden monoliths and what looked like an archway next to a bell. Naruto heard more movement from somewhere else this time. Spinning towards the sound of movement, Naruto pulled off the hilt of the Raijin no Ken from his belt. "Who's there? Show yourself," Naruto called. He activated his sword which illuminated his surroundings. Using his sword as a torch, Naruto shone the blade in various directions trying to get a better view of his surrounding. Naruto heard movement directly behind. Spinning, he took a slash at whatever was behind him. Naruto cut straight through a statue of what looked like an Eastern dragon's head. The cut was clean and smooth in a diagonal motion. Half of the statue slid away and fell to the ground shattering. While the statue made Naruto jump, it was what was on the other side of the statue that really scared Naruto. Its figure was enshrouded in darkness and mist, but Naruto could easily make out a pair of yellow glowing eyes. Seeing the slash, the figure grunted and leapt to the side of the statue. From what Naruto could make out, he or whatever it was began to spin and twirl a bamboo staff around in their hands. While spinning, the figure drew in the mist and cloaked itself in it, completely hiding the figure from view. A hand thrust out towards Naruto from the mist cloak. A sudden powerful gust picked up, pushing Naruto back and blinding him by blowing the mist at him. When Naruto could see again, he saw the figure properly. He looked like a man. He was at least 6 feet tall, completely towering over Naruto, who was around 4 foot 5 inches. He was dressed in a black silk Eastern shirt that had straps connecting down the center of the shirt. He wore a wide-brimmed wooden hat that shadowed the face of the man. He had a white top on underneath the shirt. He wore black trousers and a belt that's buckle was like a crystal ball but had a paw symbol at its center. He also wore simple black flip-flops on his feet. Pause? Naruto mentally screamed. This had all happened in barely 5 seconds. The man was now stood in a stance that held the staff in a one-handed reverse grip behind the man's body while the body was leant back in a wide-footed side-on stance with the other arm stretched out towards Naruto. Coming out of his shock and awe, Naruto believed the man wanted a fight, so he entered his stance that had him stand side-on with his feet pointed the way his body was facing parallel to each other with left hand open and loose behind his body and his right held out downwards while the Raijin was perpendicular to his arm, pointing towards the man. Taking this as a sign to begin, the man spun the staff whilst pirouetting at Naruto. The first strike came towards Naruto's head. Naruto ducked under the staff and immediately countered. Going for a stab, Naruto aimed for the man's left hip in hopes to injure, not kill, as he'd need this man to find out where he was. The man twisted his hip away from the glowing lightning blade while his arms were held behind his back as to keep away from the sword. Seeing his stab fail, Naruto went to slash at the other side of the man's body. The figure once more twisted away from the blade in the same fashion. Capitalizing on the man's position, Naruto made an upwards diagonal slash that cut through a chunk of the man's hat. The man dodged by taking a step back. Grunting in irritation, the man brought his staff back around and struck Naruto in his front ankle. Having overstretched, Naruto stumbled and was unable to dodge the next strike that hit Naruto's right side in a jabbing motion. Naruto winced in pain. That staff hurt. Naruto thought his ribs may be cracked just from the one blow. Capitalizing on Naruto's brief wince, the man slid his staff between Naruto's legs and pushed up. Naruto was lifted off of the ground by the staff and flipped over the man's head where he crashed onto a bridge. Quickly rising, Naruto reactivated his sword and leapt at the man, bringing his blade down at the man from overhead. The man dodged by stepping to the side. Naruto followed up, having failed his initial strike, leaving a smoldering gash in the floor with a roundhouse kick. The man leapt high into the air. Naruto's leg connected with what looked like the handle to a mallet that was connected to a stone monument. The mallet was launched upwards whilst spinning, snapping off of the monument from the kick. Naruto swiftly regained his balance but wasn't quick enough to avoid the man falling down towards him, spinning like a tornado with his staff outstretched. Landing, the man struck Naruto again and launched back onto the curved bridge. Spinning around to see the man standing where he was originally, facing Naruto, Naruto watched in awe as the mallet came back down towards earth, where the man snatched out of the air by the handle and slammed it back into the monument and readjusting the angle of the mallet with his staff. Naruto watched this, mouth agape. Making a snorting sound, the man pole vaulted over Naruto and landed behind him using his staff. He then put the staff between the stunned Naruto's legs again and flipped him onto the other side of the bridge. Snapping out of his shock midair, Naruto flipped and landed in a crouch and faced the man. The man leapt off of the top of the bridge and went to bring the staff down on top of Naruto's head. Not wanting to be under the strike, Naruto performed a one-handed handstand and flipped backwards. When the man's staff hit the ground, it hit with so much force that it knocked Naruto off of his feet and onto his backside. It also cleared the majority of the surrounding mist, which had began to recede during the fight. Now being able to see the sun, Naruto could fully make out his surroundings and the man. Naruto was sat under an Eastern-style ceremonial archway that had lanterns on the sides. Looking through the arch, Naruto looked down into a valley to see a monastery, where more figures like the man were practicing kata. Through the archway, there were steps leading down to the monastery. The landscape was easily the most beautiful place Naruto had ever seen. Green forests and blue ponds and rivers everywhere you look, and bountiful fields. Temporarily in awe, Naruto was snapped out of his stupor by a deep rumbling chuckle. "Beautiful, isn't it, young grasshopper?" Turning back to face the man, raging inactive, Naruto saw that the man wasn't a man at all. He was really a big bipedal panda. "Why, yeah," Naruto responded. "Tell me, young one, why is it you fight?" That came out of the blue. Not being rude, however, Naruto replied, "I don't know really," still being wary of the man. "I've been told that I'm supposed to be a ninja, protector, of a village my ancestors built and my family defended, but I've never been there myself," Naruto answered. Now that he thought about it, why'd I fight? Naruto wondered. He wants to be a ninja, but he never thought about what that entailed and why he wanted to be one. He just knew that his family did it and thought he'd do it, not for some profound reason. "I guess I've never really needed to fight." I see." The panda brought his paw up to his chin. "Reason when fighting is the most important thing. What's the point of fighting if there's no reason? None. The best reason to fight, young grasshopper, is in defense of one's home and family. That is why you should fight." Naruto pondered his words. While he's never been in a fight himself, Naruto knew for a fact that if it ever came to it, he'd lay down his life for his families. Naruto agreed with the panda. "My name's Naruto. Naruto Senju." Naruto turned and rose to his feet and offered the panda his hand. Chen rose an eyebrow in surprise. "Senju? Thought they were all gone. Very interesting." "Mine is Chen Stoutstorm," the now dubbed Chen responded, shaking Naruto's hand. "Now tell me, Naruto, how is it you ended up here in the Jade Forest?" I don't really," Naruto chuckled sheepishly while rubbing the back of his head. "I watched my uncle do this jutsu and a toad appeared when he did it. I decided to try it and ended up here." Chen rose an eyebrow at this. "Oh, a summoning eye? Well, that's very interesting. Follow me, young grasshopper." Chen walked past Naruto through the arch and started down the steps. Naruto swiftly followed. "A toad, you say? And your uncle summoned it?" Naruto med. In clarification, my, it's been many years since I last heard of a toad summoner. Was this monster named Jiraiya by any chance? Naruto was surprised that Chen knew of his uncle. "Yeah, how'd you know?" "You'll find that summoning folk enjoy boasting about their summoners. I just happened to have heard of Jiraiya from my old friend Fukusaku," Chen explained. Naruto made an "ah" sound. "I don't take it you know much about summoning, do you?" "No, not really," Naruto said sheepishly. Well, to summon one must have signed a summoning contract in blood that belongs to one of the various summoning clans. There are many clans out there like toads and as the pandas, Chen started. Of course not all clans like each other and some are more powerful and old than others. We pandas happen to be one of the oldest out there, being just as old as the toads and the slugs and snakes stretching back to the time of the great sage. Naruto listened intently. When you perform the summoning jutsu without holding a contract with a clan, you are transported to the home of the clan you are aligned to the closest. If you ended up here, then you are aligned with us pandas, which has only ever happened once before. Good thing you ended up here too, for if it was say the snakes or the rabbits, they would have eaten you. Rabbits? Naruto questioned incredulously. Oh yeah, the rabbits are vicious, don't be fooled by their floppy unassuming ears. Humans are their favorite, and nobody likes the snakes. Their summoners are the worst of the worst usually, Chen explained. Well, you didn't exactly pull your punches, Chen, Naruto said, referring to their earlier fight. You started it, Chen said indignantly. You scared me, Naruto argued. Don't be scared then, how'd I even? Naruto trailed off as they reached the monastery gates. We're here, now follow. Chen opened the gate to the monastery. The duo stepped into a training courtyard that had various training equipment for all intents and purposes. There was also groups of pandas working through kata. Naruto followed Chen through the main courtyard and into the main building. The door to the main building was red and huge. It must have weighed at least a ton. Chen walked up to the door. He stood still for a second and whispered something that Naruto couldn't hear. Then Chen somehow pushed the door open, opening it wide enough to pass through. Chen turned to see Naruto gaping at him. How? Naruto asked befuddled. Chen merely chucked. All in due time, young grasshopper. Chen carried on into the building. When Naruto stepped into the building, he was once again in awe. The room was huge. It had intricately detailed pillars holding up the roof. There were 6 in total that surrounded a tall water fountain in a hexagonal shape. The roof, between the pillars, had a huge golden dragon coiled on the roof which had spikes running down its back, sharp teeth and a curved snout. In its mouth was a great big scroll which was black and white and had yin and yang symbols all over it. On top of the fountain sat a statue of a Buddha in the lotus position with an umbrella in one hand and the other held up with the palm open. The water that cascaded down the fountain was glowing with a blue hue that glistened in the sunlit room. At the bottom of the fountain in the pool, there were lily pads of various sizes. On the biggest one sat another panda who wore an electric blue haori with the kanji for sage written on the back of it. Great Elder, I have come with a potential summoner, Chen stated as he bowed respectfully to the great panda elder. Chen didn't receive an immediate response. Instead, the elder slowly turned around, while the lily pad turned. I knew you'd come, the panda elder said in raspy high-pitched voice. Looking at the panda, Naruto could tell he was old. He had wrinkles all over the place and half-lidded eyes. The elder didn't wear a top under the haori and was also without footwear. He wore black trousers with a rope for a belt. Great sage, that's incredible. How did you know we'd come? Chen asked in awe of his great leader. The elder put on a face of absolute seriousness, like what he was about to say was top secret. The scouts reported you coming to me. The elder started to cackle in a high-pitched laugh. Naruto and Chen, who were the only other occupants of the room, sweat dropped. Anyway, elder, young Naruto Senju came here after performing the summoning jutsu without a contract. Given the only other person we've ever had as a summoner and his lineage, I believe it'd be best to give him our contract, Chen explained. Naruto became excited at the prospect. Ah, another young Senju. I remember when that little sproutling Hashirama was first brought here and signed the contract. He used to always fall for my premonitions. The elder began to cackle again. What, my great-grandfather had a summoning contract? Why didn't anyone know? Naruto asked in wonder. This was big news, as it was never reported that the Shodem Hokage had a summoning contract. Well, of course he had a summoning contract, young sproutling. How else do you think he learned Sage Mode? So that's how he did it. Lots of things concerning Hashirama were enshrouded in mystery, like why only he could use the wood release and how he learned Sage Mode and so on. And he didn't tell anyone because he was an idiot. The elder began to cackle once again. Naruto got the feeling that the elder liked his own jokes a little too much. I see, Naruto responded. I see greatness in you, the elder said seriously suddenly. How is it you know that, elder? Chen asked in awe and reverence. Did you see it? His future in a vision? I know, because he's here. And we're great? Cackling ensued once more. Chen and Naruto's sweat dropped. Now young Sproutling. The reason you are here is because you, like Hashirama, have the potential to once more awaken the wood style. Only we can teach you how to use it, as only we know the nature techniques and only you have the power to use them for wood style jutsu. Now that shocked Naruto. I can use wood style? Why me, why not someone else? Naruto was in shock. The wood style was and is the most powerful and sought after Kekkei Genkei out's power and prowess is legendary, and even Naruto in all of his naivete understood that having such power would put a huge target on his back. Why? That's a tale that stretches back to the time of the Sage of Six Paths. Naruto had heard his story. As had every child out there, and for another time. You are here for the contract which you may sign. Saying that, the elder went through a small series of hand seals. The dragon's mouth on the ceiling opened and from it dropped the scroll. It fell and knocked Chen to the floor by landing on his head. That fall is supposed to be slower. Oh, I forgot a hand seal. The elder started to cackle again. Chen sat up with a groan. Had his hat not been there, Chen would have probably been knocked out. Chen rose to his feet and presented the panda contract to Naruto. Write your name in blood, then put a handprint in blood at the bottom, Chen explained, opening the scroll. In the first column, Naruto could see Hashirama's name written in blood and a handprint underneath his name. Naruto followed suit and wrote his name in the column next to his great-grandfather's. Naruto felt a small surge of pride at being closer to his grandfather in such a way. Now young Sproutling, you can't learn Sage Mode and Wood Style until you're 10. The reason being? Because I said so. He began cackling. You will use these next 2 years to train with Chen and become strong enough to use Sage Mode. Understood, elder, Naruto said, bowing. Also you must wear these clothes. To spread awareness for pandas. The elder declared. Something dropped from the ceiling and hit Chen in the head again. It was a set of clothes the same as Chen's. Summon Chen whenever you train. Naruto and Chen nodded at this. Finally. Get lost. I was having such a sweet dream about this young. He waved his hand and Naruto disappeared in a cloud of white smoke. When the smoke cleared, Naruto was back outside his home and Sai his family. Present. Suffice to say that Naruto received a stern talking to about doing stupid things. The revelation of the pandas and Hashirama came as a great shock after Naruto told his family about the events of the day. The revelation of the rabbits left Mito mortified. Also the fact that Naruto would be learning Sage Mode was also huge. Mito naturally demanded that she also be taught Sage Mode as to not allow her brother to get ahead, going as far as to summon Lady Shima and Lord Fukusaku themselves somehow. The Toad elders were so impressed by the feat that they actually agreed to teach her when Naruto was to be taught as well. Mito also vowed to find her own Kekkei Genkei as she refused to be left behind by Naruto. From then on, Mito and Naruto would train with Chen. Chen, as it turned out, was the equivalent of the Toad elders Shima and Fukusaku. Also he was a master of the ninja arts, having mastered Bojutsu, Taijutsu, Genjutsu and all 5 ninjutsu nature manipulations. His mastery was proven when he put both Jiraiya and Tsunade on their backs while they were going all out. Sage Mode and 100 Healing Seal and all. Now Mito and Naruto were very much proficient in all areas on being a shinobi. Mito was able to use Genjutsu to its fullest extent while Naruto couldn't, however. While Mito seemed to have a natural aptitude for the illusionary arts despite her poor chakra control, Naruto seemed to be only able to use high-level techniques. So Naruto took to spamming the Bringer of Darkness jutsu whenever he could. Ninjutsu-wise, Mito and Naruto had learned the Academy 3. While Mito could create normal clones, she also learned the Shadow Clone Jutsu along with Naruto. The pair also learned the Substitution Jutsu and Transformation Jutsu along with a few Elemental Jutsu. Naruto and Mito, using the Shadow Clone secret, each mastered their own elemental affinities. Mito could split a leaf, cut a rock and stop the flow of a waterfall with wind chakra. While Naruto learned how to shape mud using only his chakra, how to form stones using his chakra through infusing mud with earth chakra, and Naruto learned how to assemble and disassemble boulders with earth chakra. Naruto also could alter the flow of water using his chakra, could move and shape water by letting his chakra be infused into a river and allowing the water chakra to change the movement and shape of the river, and could also expel water chakra from his body to allow him to mold it in thin air and as a result drawing water from the atmosphere. That last exercise was only possible if you had a great enough water affinity to be able to create water chakra refined enough to be used and drawn from the atmosphere. So far, only Naruto and the Naidame have ever been able to achieve such a feat. In terms of Fuinjutsu, the two were coming along masterfully. While they could be considered masters as they've reached level 10 of Fuinjutsu, the two are now learning about chakra theory in greater detail as well as science to be able to create truly advanced seals. All in all, by the time the pair would be 10, they'd be easily Jonin level. After booking a room at the local inn for the night, Mito and Naruto went to do some exploring while Shizune stayed in their room and Tsunade most likely scampered off to do some more gambling. When Mito and Naruto returned to the room at around 9 o'clock, they found a note on their door which read, "We've got the girl, if you want her back in one piece, then bring us our money at midnight to the local lake." "That's not good," Naruto stated. "Well no duh, they've got Shizune, I can't sense her." Naruto looked panicked at this. "We better go find mom," Naruto suggested. Of course he would. "No point, she's probably leathered by now." Naruto looked down at this. "It's up to us. Come on, let's look around and I'll see if I can't sense Shizune." Waking up was difficult. She felt exhausted and in pain. The hell happened? Shizune recalled sitting in the room they'd booked at the inn when someone came and kicked the door down. She tried to put up a fight but got beaten up pretty badly. That's why she was in pain. Those men that came in, they immediately made to kidnap her, shouting something about wanting their money. That'd explain it, Shizune thought grimly. Shizune could feel her face was badly bruised. She could also taste blood. Her ribs were cracked and her stomach was also bruised badly. Her clothes were still on, thank goodness. Shizune let out a sigh. It was bound to happen at some point. With her eyes still closed, Shizune felt something wet and warm on her face. Panicking, she opened her eyes to come face to face with a pig. She heard a soft oink from the pig, almost as if it was asking if she was okay. Maybe that's the concussion talking. Shizune groaned as she sat up. Looking around, it looked like she was in a rundown barn. She could hear signs of life coming from a little ways off. The barn was the average run-of-the-mill barn that had hay strewn all over the place and pens for the different animals, which were of present. Must be a abandoned farm, Shizune thought. The small pig placed a small hoof onto her lap, gaining her attention, and gave her a worried oink. "I'm okay," Shizune reassured as she started to heal herself. After she was done, she gave the pig a pat and a smile. The little pig gave an excited oink and started to run around her. "I wonder if there's a way out of here." As if responding to her question, the little pig ran off to the back of the barn and made a gesture as if to beckon her over. Must be the concussion. Humoring the pig, she followed. When they came to the back wall, Shizune was about to say how she was going crazy for listening to a pig until said pig pushed a plank of wood on the wall and it tilted outwards, creating an opening. Shizune was quite surprised. That's one smart pig. Shizune was beginning to like the pig. Looking at her gray kimono, which was already filthy, she crawled through the small hole in the wall and managed to escape the barn. Now which way back to the village? Shizune wondered out loud. Once more, the pig beckoned her to follow. The pig hasn't let her down yet, so Shizune decided to follow. Quietly following the pig, they came to the fence that surrounded the small farm they were on. Must be why the pig's still here, Shizune mused. Hopping the fence with the pig in hand, Shizune followed her little companion into the night. When the debt collectors went to the barn in hopes of bringing the girl to the lake for the exchange, they found her gone. They immediately set out to search for their ex-prisoner. Picking up Shizune's chakra trail wasn't too hard for Mito. A chakra trail being essentially someone's scent but chakra that Mito can sense. When the twins arrived at a farm where they believed Shizune was being held, they found the camp in disarray. Apparently Shizune had already managed to escape. Feeling for her trail, Mito felt Shizune's chakra trail leading into the nearby forest back towards the village they were staying in. They made to leave and rendezvous with Shizune elsewhere, when they were found. The debt collectors were apparently about to leave to try and relocate Shizune. The group of 20 converged on the twins. "Well, look, we Avenue, Air," one of them said, menacingly. Before they could say anything else, Mito and Naruto attacked. They made short work of the bandits. "That's what you get for kidnapping Shizi," Mito exclaimed, kicking a random bouncer. "Come on, Mito, let's go find Shizi." So far, Shizune and the pig had been having a very nice walk through the forest. It was late, so the forest was dark and potentially dangerous. However, her companion seemed to be fine navigating through the darkness. Or so she thought. The ground seemed to give way beneath her and the pig. She fell for a short while, and due to the darkness she couldn't see the ground. When she finally hit it, she felt her leg snap. Letting out a scream of pain, Shizune held her leg in place. "That's what I get for thinking so far so good." The pig once again raced over to check to see if she was all right. She was going to say she was fine, but a huge shadow was cast over her. Turning around, she came face to face with, easily tree-hopping through the forest. They were quickly gaining on Shizune. They were close enough that they heard her scream. Reaching out with her senses, she could feel her sister's pain. Regardless of seriousness or circumstances, Mito's empathic ability told her of her sister's pain and then fear. Pure fear. Mito began to fear the worst. She felt like she was seeing her beloved sister die right in front of her. She felt like she was her sister, going through whatever her sister was. It made Mito feel scared. So incredibly scared. She was so scared that she'd lose her sister. She couldn't have that. Wouldn't. Naruto tried to keep up but couldn't feel what Mito could. He didn't have enough incentive. She felt her brother's worry, but Shizune's fear overpowered it. When Mito reached Shizune's position, she saw Shizune's reason for her fear. A bear. A huge black bear that was about to slash Shizune's throat. The paw seemed to come down like a sledgehammer. Mito could feel Shizune's fear. Her own fear of losing her sister. Mito reached out a hand to her sister, as if to try and take hers. Shizune wasn't a fighter, she's a medic. A good person. She didn't deserve this. Mito clenched her eyes shut and let out a scream. Mito felt like she had somehow grabbed something. Shizune was still alive, she could still feel her. Pulling on whatever it was with all her might, she heard a thud down below in the small ravine which led into a cave. Bravely, Mito cracked open an eye. Her hand was still outstretched. Protruding from her hand was a long golden chain. Following the length of the chain, she saw it had impaled the bear and pulled it away from the still alive Shizune. It all happened in barely 5 seconds. Thank goodness, Mito thought, before passing out from emotional stress.